We're finally going to chat about some embroidery on this YouTube channel, and I want to tell you my top 5 filling stitches. So number 1, it's a classic, but I think often used for outlines rather than filling, running stitch. Running stitch is such a simple stitch, often used in Indian kantha work. It's a really beautiful stitch and enables you to create these filled areas that aren't too dense. Whilst I love a satin stitch, it's a very dense stitch and often I find it a bit too heavy, which is the reason it has not made the shortlist. So if I want something that feels a little bit more translucent, not too heavy, then absolute favourite, running stitch. Number 2, always a joy to stitch, it's got to be chain stitch. Chain stitch again is one of the most simple stitches. It's absolutely one of your basic arsenal of stitches. When I first started sewing, for the first 2 years, I literally only knew satin stitch, running stitch and chain stitch. And you can create some beautiful things with it. Chain stitch, when used for filling, has limitations because there's only so fine you can make certain areas you fill in. It creates really beautiful pieces like this, or back to my antelopes here, when it's used like this, where it's filled but in all these different circles. Absolutely love chain stitch in that scenario. A good filling stitch if you just want a single colour and you don't want to go into some crazy technique. So speaking of crazy technique, third up in the all-time tops list is darning. And if you know me, if you know my designs, you know I'm a bit obsessed with darning. In embroidery, often it's called needle weaving, woven embroidery, you know, all sorts of weird terms. I call it darning because it's exactly the same process as darning. And it is what you use to create these woven areas of a design. You know, used here for that. In this guy here, the fisherman, these trousers. It's such an amazing way of bringing in loads of colours, making your designs look really complicated, but it's actually really simple. Absolutely love a bit of darning. Fourth up, now this is an unusual shout and may make an appearance in my favourite outline stitches too, but I love whipped stem stitch for filling. Let me show you. You see this guy here? This is just rows and rows of whipped stem stitch. Now I've made this a little complicated because I've alternated the colour of the whipping between each row, but it's almost like this candy cane effect and it ends up being the most beautiful textural element, but a bit like I said with running stitch, it has this beautiful element where it's a little bit translucent, which I think makes for a really interesting and a bit more sophisticated feeling embroidery. Or I've used it lots on this piece across all the tails here of the birds, and you still get the feeling of the tail, but you have to follow the line, so you can't fill anything perfectly, and I love that. I love a stitch that adds limitations to how you do things. So last up in the list, and this is really a new stitch to me. I've only learnt it about 3 months ago, and I have been using it obsessively since, and that is lattice work, or I mean, I've read all sorts of things. Often there seems to go by the name trellis work. I mean, you tell me, I'm not sure what's the right word, but this tree here is filled with a lattice stitch, or this little bird yet to have a frame. This one, this whole border here is all in lattice stitch, and I just love it. I feel like when you get, and I just love it, I think when you get the colours right, and I definitely have done a lot of experiments where my colours of my lattice aren't quite right, when you get the colours right, it gives me that really exciting feeling that you can only get in life, I think, from a piece of really good embroidery. So that's it, that's my top 5 filling stitches. Tell me yours. I want to know what filling stitches you like using. I want to know what ones I need to learn. Tell me new ones, I want to learn them, and I hope you enjoyed this.